For this week's final project, we're doing the audit for the Title IX. Um, what is Title IX? Again, it was kind of weird when I first came overseas from New Zealand to America, and I'd never once heard of a Title IX. And I was like, alright. My first actual observation of Title IX was when I realized that a lot of big D1 schools have women's soccer and not men's soccer, and I was actually kind of frustrated by it. I thought it was kind of unfair in a way for me, but that's just my personal opinion. But Title IX is a federal civil rights law in the United States of America that was passed as part of the Educational Amendment of 1972. It was co-authored and introduced by Senator Birch Bayne, I believe, in the U.S. Senate, and Congresswoman Patsy Mink. It was basically brought in to prevent the discrimination in various field-based race, color, religion, sex, or other national origins in the areas of employment and public accommodation. So basically, before this time, women weren't given the same rights. A lot of athletic sports that were coming about for men were club sports for women, or they just didn't have organizations or didn't allow access to women, basically denying them that ability to progress. It was called and put in place for athletic as well as academic facilities. For a lot of people, they blamed it like as in the glass mirror, the glass ceiling, sorry, where you couldn't really get past a certain level. You know, everyone else can climb, the men can climb up the ladder, but you're stuck there, truly based on your sex or other rationales like this. So basically, what they were trying to do was get rid of this to varying degrees, and this was the best that they came up with, and it really just exploded women's sports. It really excelled it in America, with now America having one of the best semi-pro, I guess, to a standard now with some of these facilities, and they call it a non-professional athlete. But like the facilities and the experiences and the expectations and everything about it is nearly professional in any other country. So it just sets a very good benchmark for students and players and athletes coming in, because these universities are world renowned. That's why so many internationals are all trying to come overseas to America to study now, because the education's so good and there's so many opportunities for everyone. Who does Title IX directly affect? Title IX applies to all educational institutions across high school and collegiate, so universities and colleges, both public and private. So I was kind of intrigued when I was learning about this, because I was like, okay, well, how does a private school kind of correlate in with this? Because a private is its own privately funded program. How can you enforce a rule on a public, which is funded by the state, to a private that finds their own financial means? And it basically comes down to federal funds, and I did not know this. Almost all private colleges and universities must abide by Title IX regulations because they receive federal funding through the federal financial aid programs used by the students. So if a university has financial aid and their students are receiving it, that is through the federal government, then you have to abide by the rules to be offered that. And if they decide that they don't want to follow Title IX, then they are not going to receive that federal funding, which basically hurts the students that are attending the school. Really interesting. Did not know that. So that's kind of an interesting part, and then all high schools, public and private, who also receive this funding and whatnot, abide by this. I would be interested to read about the public or private high schools who are privately funded that don't use financial aid. I'm curious on how that works, unless, again, they receive some sort of funding from the government at some point, then I guess they would have to follow through that. How is Title IX applied to athletics is another big one of these gaps that we wanted to kind of fill in. Because athletic programs in the educational and high school level, so college, university, and high school, they are basic parts of the educational activities programs. So Title IX, as it applies to athletics, is 1, participation. So Title IX requires that women and men be provided adequate opportunities to participate in sports. Title IX does not require institutes to offer identical sports, but an equal opportunity to play. So this is one of their recommendations, like their requirements of it. So they're saying that they don't require you to mirror each sport, so men's soccer, women's soccer, American football, stuff, basketball. It just requires you to have, on the basis of 10 sports, 5 being women, 5 being men, given equal opportunity to play. Interesting one, because when I was reading that fell into a little category I was reading on before. It was actually one of my last week's projects, which was the Caliver's Board of Trustees. And so this kind of correlates in with this because the men's swimming was cut as a $600,000 debt cut, and they cut a few programs based on varying degrees of their efficiency to generate revenue, their high school usage, and athletic participation, the facilities on campus, the reception they get on campus in terms of how much people show up. And so that was kind of interesting. So they cut the men's swimming and a few other sports, but not women's swimming. Basically, he tried to say that they violated. Pardon me. They violated. They violated the Title IX and the 14th Amendment, basically saying that they cut his program, but they didn't touch the women's, and so it was an unfairness there. Though the university kept in their guidelines of keeping, I think it was like 14 sports, 7 men, 7 women. So they weren't in violation, and they stuck true to the Title IX code. Therefore, they were found non-guilty of any discrepancies against the plaintiff. Scholarship. Oh my gosh. Title IX requires that female and male student athletes receive athletic scholarships, dollars proportional to their participation. So there's a few varying degrees in it that basically correlates so that they get roughly the same amount of money. There's a few stipulations and variants between the two, but scholarships need to be with basically the same amount of money so that there is no unfair treatment in terms of, you give 12 rides in the NAIA like William Woods, and then you give 7 in women's. Like that's violation of Title IX. So they have to be 10 and 10, or like they need to be met. So that's just to kind of keep a fair playing ground and equal opportunity, which is what their main focus is. Number 3 is other benefits. Title IX requires the equal treatment of female and male student athletes in the provisions of equipment and supplies, making sure that they are not put to the side in terms of when they need stuff. Their supplies are given to them as requested so that they are equipped to handle situations. B, scheduling games and practice times need to be, fair and equal. You can't be, men have the first say all the time. It's usually just who has the scheduling, and facility-wise, who picks it first. Interesting one that I also didn't realize with Title IX is that for women's soccer, at least, women's go first. It's because if the men played and then the women played afterwards, a lot of people wouldn't attend the games. So they held the women's first, and then they did the men secondly, which I found interesting. I did not know why women always played first over the men, and it's because of Title IX, apparently. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. See, travel and daily allowances per diem. So, again, everything just has to be divided 50-50 and shared. So for them, and a lot of their requirements are that they meet the daily allowance so that they are given fair opportunity in terms of if they get given a daily budget of $100, that the same is given to the others. Access to tutoring is another big one. It's just, again, everything is just making sure that it's fair. Coaching needs to be given, that you can't have 5 coaches on one side and 1 coach on the other, that it needs to be equal. Locker rooms, practice and competitive facilities need to be shared. You can't give men's soccer these massive facilities and then give women's soccer nothing. You need to kind of correlate the two. Medical and training facilities and services, so that you need to be able to give the facilities, again, they need to have equal use of the facilities. Publicity and promotions need to be covered. At a small school like us, we as a program, we publicize and promote our own games and stuff differently to the women. It doesn't mean that we're doing it as our own program, not the school. So if the school was doing it and they did a huge thing on us, the women would have to expect to get something done there as well. Support services and recruitment of student athletes need to be, again, equal in terms of you can't favoritize one program over another just because of sex. Okay. It is not just an athletic law. Title IX applies to classroom and club activities through the athletic side of Title IX has had the greatest deal of attention. So that this doesn't just correlate to the athletics, but it also correlates to the field and the classroom. But the field has had the most attention drawn to it based on cases against them and varying degrees of competitiveness at the D1 and D2 level. I was looking at the three-prong test. And I was looking at the one that stated a school may show that it is fully and effectively accommodating the athletics, interests, and abilities of the woman and its student body. So for me, I chose that one because I find it the most interesting because it basically is talking about how, like at William Woods, and this is the example we're going to use, the facilities, we don't have a lot of them. And with that, we have to be accommodating in ways that don't violate Title IX. So men's and women's soccer didn't have a locker room until 2 years ago. So now we both share the basement, though the men predominantly use the basement. Women use it occasionally, but before games and stuff, it is the men that are always in the basement before games. Women tend to meet and congregate for a small bit, but it tends to be more men-orientated locker room. And this just comes down to the culture of the team, I want to put it, because we've both been given equal opportunity. The fields, we have two field facilities for men's soccer and women's soccer. Practice in a training field, we divide the field up with the same training times, so we get one half each. From that, we share with oppositions who come into the locker room. We share the locker room, and that's women's basketball, and the men's. Volleyball and basketball all share the same facilities. They don't have anything special. The only difference is that men's basketball, since we do not have a men's volleyball, has that locker room to themselves where the women's share, which in a way could be viewed as a Title IX violation, but since we don't have another team that shares that locker room, it's not in violation. So it kind of works out, well. And I'm sure when the games, like a home and away team, show up, then they just share the locker rooms, home team and away team, so it doesn't really affect it too bad. Athletic training room, same facilities are used at William Wood. No team is given the preference. If you're booking ice baths, you need to book it earlier. A lot of the girls' teams are more organized in the sense that they get a lot more ice baths before the men do, and so they usually got first pick. But that's not down to the school deciding that they are better and they need first pick, but more rather that they are more organized and on top of it with picking the times in which they do their ice baths. William Woods is, in my eyes, a very equal opportunity school. They don't at any point kind of favoritize any program more than another. Everything is given in fair equal treatment to the two schools. And with Title IX in America, I feel like it's more focused towards the women and give them opportunity, which is because they were the oppressed group during the law abiding of this. But it also affects men, and men can affect this rule when they feel like they are being subjugated to unfair treatment based on sex. So like if there is an unequal men's program to women's programs, then they can contest this. But ultimately, this is what Title IX is there for, is to ensure that everyone's got a fair treatment in a very fluctuating, constant, ever-changing cycle. As universities are run as businesses, it becomes harder to generate revenue, and so sometimes programs need to be cut and programs need to be brought back. And that's just the cycle of which university sports has become.